Hello, everybody. Glad you could join me. This lecture is a lecture on the Gospel of Mark, and it basically is going to walk you through the historical background of Mark by going through the PowerPoint that you will have downloaded. So the best thing that you can do is to maybe print that download out and work your way through it as you're watching the lecture, because I'm assuming that that's what you'll be doing. So I'm going to go ahead and turn off the video here rather quickly and switch you over to screen sharing. So stop the video. Okay, and I'm going to share the screen where I have the lecture, and we'll start working through the lecture. Okay, when we engage the text in a historical fashion, we ask a number of questions. I call them the W questions: the who, the for whom, the where, the when, and the why, and about what. And the historical critical method works basically with primary sources, that is, in this case, your biblical texts, and some secondary sources in order to derive answers to these questions. And it's these answers to these questions that will help you to resolve the historical issues. So when we move, for example, to the question of who, the problem here, who should we determine the author of the second gospel was? Well, it's not such an easy question to resolve. One way that one might ask, in the primary source, does the author ever give his name? Now, I trust you will have already paused by this point and read through this material. If you haven't, please go ahead and do so. Go ahead, pause, read through the account, Mark 1, 1-8, and 16, 1-8, and the Papias account. Pause it, and then come back, and I'll talk about it. Okay, assuming that you've read through it, you looked at the beginning and probably at the end of Mark, and you probably found that Mark never claims credit. So, for example, if you look at the end of Mark, you see these 8 verses, and you don't see that Mark is actually claiming credit for his gospel. And the same at the beginning. It says the gospel of Jesus Christ. The heading at the beginning that you might find in some of your Bibles is probably not historical. So if you were to go to Mark 1:1, everything above the beginning of the good news of Jesus Christ, the Son of God, so the Gospel according to Mark, the proclamation of John the Baptist, chapter 1, that's all editorial. So that's not in the original manuscripts. The names, the titles, did not make it in until the 4th century manuscripts. So we don't really know who from the original source who wrote Mark. Now, if you read the Papias account, Papias is writing around 120 that he believes that Mark was the author, the editor of Peter, and was living in Rome sometime before the death of Peter. So Papias tells us that, but Papias' account is secondhand in the church historian Eusebius, who writes around the 4th century. So we don't have Papias' original source, we just have a copy of it in Eusebius, who is 4th century. So really the best secondary evidence we have is 3 centuries later. So from a historical perspective, I guess you could ask the critical question, do we really know who wrote it? I guess we can trust Papias. I don't think he would make it up. But we just have to realize that from a secondary perspective, we don't really know who wrote the Gospel of Mark from a historical critical perspective. Okay? Now, the second question is to whom the Gospel writer was writing. where does the gospel writer's audience come from? Now I'm going to let you pause and read through this, read through all of these texts, and see if you can figure out where they might not be from and where they might be from. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and pause it. You go ahead and pause it and come back and we'll talk about it. Okay, so I'm just going to talk about one of these. In Mark 15:34, you have Jesus cry out. At 3 o'clock, Jesus cried out with a loud voice, Eloi, Eloi, lema sabachthani. Well, does anybody understand? You all understand that? No, I suppose you don't speak Aramaic. Now, in the Greek, if you're reading in Greek, I can show you that. If you're reading in the Greek, it says that Jesus cried out with a loud voice, Eloi, Eloi, lema sabachthani. That it takes the Aramaic and it puts it into Greek letters, still Aramaic. What this means for the readers of the text, and then it says, which means, or in the Greek, which is translated, my God, what this means is that the readers of this text did not read Aramaic. They were Greek readers. So we can learn from this that Mark's audience must have been Greek speaking, and they were not Palestine. They could not have been from the traditional land of Israel because they don't know Aramaic. Now, if you look at 1539, Turian, and if you look at some of the other clues asked you to look at here in 5:9 and 6:37 and 12:15 are Roman coin names and other kinds of Roman words. The audience clearly was familiar with Latin, but not so familiar with Aramaic. So I guess this helps us rule out that the audience is in Israel, and it helps us see that they could be anywhere in the Roman. The next question. Where does the gospel writer come from? Now this one is a little bit tricky, and I'm just going to go ahead and have you open up the map in your textbook, and I think the page number is actually 66 in your textbook. And if you read chapter 7:31, so you go to Mark 7:31. I'll pull that up here for you. Then he returned from the region of Tyre and went by way of Sidon towards the Sea of Galilee in the region of, or to the region of Decapolis, right? So if you look at your maps on page 66, it says he's coming from Tyre, right? Then he returned from the region of Tyre. Well, that's up in your top left hand of your map. Over on the edge, on the top left edge, where it says province of Syria by the Mediterranean Sea, province of Syria, you'll see Tyre. Well, it says he returned to the region of Tyre and went towards the Sea of Galilee. How in the world does he go? Why in the world would he go from Tyre all the way up south, Sidon, to go down to the Sea of Galilee? A lot of historical scholars have said, you know what, that's just not impossible. In terms of understanding geographically how this region worked. It's certainly interesting to me that he says he's going on the way to Sidon towards the Sea of, or on the way to Sea of Galilee through Sidon, but that's kind of like saying, you know, I went on my way to Rock Hill by way of Albemarle. I mean, why would I go all the way up to Albemarle to go down to Rock Hill if I was coming to the Charlotte campus? That doesn't make any sense. So one thing that we might believe that the gospel writer didn't really know, he didn't really know the Israel very well. He didn't know the geographic region of Israel. This seems to be confirmed in the last slide. If you read like 7:3 through 4, He doesn't quite know the Jewish customs very well of Jesus' day. So there is a case to be made that he may not know exactly what Israel was like. And, well, that actually connects with Eusebius' account, or the account from Papias, because it says that Mark was Peter's secretary. It didn't say Mark was himself a Jew, or that he was himself knowledgeable of customs in Israel. So we don't know where the gospel writer came from. His Greek is not great. He doesn't seem to be it doesn't seem to be his mother tongue. He's good at Greek, but he's not great at Greek. So, we're not really sure when or where he was from. Now, when? This is a really interesting question. I'm going to go ahead and ask you to pause here and read the passages on Suetonius and Tacitus and some of these clues. There's a lot of stuff to read. So go ahead and do that, and then come back and I'll go through it. Okay, assuming that you've read through this material, you read the accounts in Suetonius and Tacitus, and you read that in both of those, Nero was persecuting Christians around 64. Nero blamed the Christians for the fire in Rome. He set the fire, actually, in order to rebuild Rome. He wanted to say that he found Rome built of wood and he rebuilt it of marble. Or that Nero fiddled while Rome burned. That's another saying of Nero, right? We know that Nero probably did that, but then he blamed the Christians. He needed a scapegoat, and the Christians were that. So if you read through these passages in 440 and 515 and in chapter 9 and so on, you probably found that in those passages, there was a great deal of what we would consider anxiety or fear. So let's go to Mark 4:40. Why are you afraid? Have you still no faith? Or 10:32. Sorry. They were on the road going to Jerusalem, and Jesus was walking ahead of them. They were amazed, and those who followed were afraid. Or even Mark 16:8. So they went out and fled from the tomb, for terror and amazement had seized them, and they were said nothing to anything, for they were afraid. In fact, the last word in Mark's gospel is afraid. Fear permeates Mark's gospel. You find this again and again and again. And then if you read in 31 through 37 or 9:30 through 37, I think probably the most illustrative one is Mark 10:32 through 35. I'm sorry, Mark 13. I wanted to go to Mark 13. Mark 13, 9 through 13. As for yourselves, beware, for they will hand you over to councils, and you will be beaten in synagogues, and you will stand before governors and kings because of me, as a testimony to them. As the good news must first be proclaimed to all nations. When they bring you to trial and hand you over, do